It's Friday, and at the special report today, we are talking about some of the biggest news stories of the last week. From Bill Cosby being released from prison to college athletes finally being able to get paid for their name, image, and likeness. It's our special Hot Topics edition, and I have some of my favorite experts here to give you the story behind the story. And today we are taking your questions. Just post them in the comments section and you will get a response. So let's get started.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
Here for the week's biggest legal stories is criminal defense attorney and former New York prosecutor Bernarda Villalona. Welcome back to the show, Bernarda.
Thank you for having me, Areva. I'm excited.
Yeah, so much happening in the news this week related to law and legal issues. I feel like if you didn't have a law degree, you may have been lost from Bill Cosby to Donald Trump. But first, we've got to start off with this big story I think caught everybody by surprise. Wednesday morning, everything started jumping off, phones started ringing, alerts started going off that Bill Cosby was going to be walking out of that Pennsylvania prison in a couple of hours because the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned the conviction, the 2018 conviction, the three-count conviction of aggravated sexual assault involving Bill Cosby and Andrea Constand. First, I'll just ask you, how surprised were you with the Supreme Court's decision?
I was surprised by the Supreme Court's decision, but first I have to say that my heart goes out to sexual assault victims. Obviously, they should never have to go through an incident like that, and then to be put through these trials and tribulations just to end up with an outcome like this is very sad. I don't want it to take away from those victims that are out there that please come forward. But what I would tell you, let's be clear of what the Supreme Court said. The Supreme Court did not say that Bill Cosby is innocent. The Supreme Court did not vindicate Bill Cosby. The Supreme Court simply overturned a conviction based on a promise that was made by D.A. Castor in 2005. And because of that promise that Bill Cosby relied on and afforded his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination based on that promise, that is what the court is saying, why they are dismissing the case, because the prosecutor should have followed through with the promise that they made, even though it wasn't through the proper channels.
I want to take you back, Bernarda, before we talk, and thank you for that summation of what the Supreme Court ruled, because a lot of people are getting that wrong, thinking that somehow he was vindicated on the merits. But let's go back to the incident involving Miss Constant, and just, give people briefly the context in which these allegations were even brought.
Okay. So Ms. Constant, back in 2004, she used to work at Temple University, and that's how Bill Cosby met her. So they were, I don't know if you want to call it dating, but seeing each other, and had gone out on several dates. But there's a specific time on a specific occasion where Ms. Constant says that she was over Bill Cosby's house and Bill Cosby gave her some pills, and that all she knows is that she wakes up and her pants are unbuttoned, and that there was something that actually happened, but she wasn't clear about what happened. Either way, some time passes, and ultimately she ends up reporting it to the police department in Canada, who then sends it to the police department out in Pennsylvania. Either way, the DA of Montgomery County back then, Mr. Castor, he launched an investigation, and with launching an investigation, he determined that based on all the evidence that he had, that he will not be successful in a criminal prosecution. That is a determination that he made as the chief law enforcement officer of Montgomery County, that he will not be successful in winning against Bill Cosby. Based on that, he used his discretion and was like, I want to get justice for Ms. Constant. What can I do?
Let me ask you this, Bernarda. So a lot has been made about this agreement, and you just referenced it, that former district attorney Bruce Castor, who went on to be one of the impeachment lawyers for Donald Trump, allegedly made, and I say allegedly because, as you know, the trial court allowed testimony to go forward in the trial regarding this agreement, this alleged agreement between Castor and Cosby's lawyers not to prosecute him criminally. And Castor himself testified, lawyers for Constant testified. Unfortunately, the lawyer involved for Bill Cosby had passed away, so he wasn't available to testify. But the judge, the trial judge, who had an opportunity to evaluate the credibility, to observe the witnesses on the witness stand, said that Castor's testimony was inconsistent. And, you know, in the dissenting Supreme Court decision, there's even some suggestion that maybe this whole agreement that didn't come up until much later was an after the fact creation by Castor because he was taking so much heat for having not prosecuted Bill Cosby. But you know, I bring that up to say, in a typical agreement between a prosecutor and a defendant, not to prosecute, what should we expect to see in a typical agreement? You've been a prosecutor. What you've done, I'm sure, hundreds, if not thousands, of those agreements.
So, Areva, let's be clear. Every jurisdiction is different. So I also used to be a prosecutor in Pennsylvania. I was a prosecutor in Philadelphia for 3 years. So specifically for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, for there to be an immunity agreement, meaning that you cannot be prosecuted by the district attorney's office, a judge, a court has to sign off on that agreement to make it official. That did not happen in this case. So that's where the problems lie. This is why there was disagreement as whether they can go forward, not go forward, what we should do, because the normal parameters weren't followed in this case. Instead, what the court said, because Castor acted as if there was an agreement and it was formalized by one, giving a press release, signing the press release, and also sending the new prosecutor that his intention was to not prosecute Cosby, the Court of Appeals said, you know what? You acted as if there was an agreement in place, and to Cosby's detriment. But for you telling him, I will not prosecute you for the sexual assault against Ms. Constant, Cosby would not have testified in the deposition. He would not have incriminated himself. He would not have waived his Fifth Amendment privilege. So because the court found that it was so damning that Cosby relied on this so-called agreement, and he's waiving a constitutional right that all of us actually have, the court felt that the strongest message to send to the country, not just to Cosby, and to every district attorney's office out there, if you make an agreement where the actual defendant relies on that agreement and gives up their constitutional right, then you must stick by it no matter who the new district attorney is. And that's because of the power of the prosecutor. And they wanted to preserve the integrity of the prosecutor. Because if we don't follow those agreements, guess what? Will you have cooperators? Will you have informants? Will people rely on plea negotiations? Will people come in a proffer and give you information in hopes that you don't prosecute them? That will send such a chilling effect that the appellate court wanted to make sure and put everyone on notice. You make an agreement, you have to stick by it, especially when someone gives up their constitutional right and incriminates themselves based on an agreement that you made as the lead law enforcement official of that county.
I think everybody can understand that, Bernarda, when the prosecutor, him or herself, has followed the rules and has reduced that agreement into a written document and has gotten that agreement signed off on by courts. And there's a reason that process is in place, in writing, signed off on by the court, so as to avoid these side deals.
Absolutely.
And to avoid the kind of confusion and chaos that we saw with respect to this alleged agreement. And then, what about the Epstein case? Epstein in Florida, Jeffrey Epstein, accused of, having sexual relations with children, pornography. There was a similar argument made that he had been promised by a prosecutor, a U.S. attorney, in fact, that he wouldn't be prosecuted. But later we saw New York extradite him, take him to New York, and file charges against him. So what's the difference?
So, one, and just be clear, Areva, remember that with Cosby and Costa, they did not follow the norm. And that's number one problem. That's one thing that everyone should know. If you're going to you have any criminal charges or you're facing criminal charges, make sure you get a criminal defense attorney that knows what they're doing and are aware of the actual practices. Because if they would have got the immunity agreement signed by the judge to begin with, we wouldn't be in this predicament. And of course, there would have been no prosecution against Cosby. Now, in dealing with Jeffrey Epstein, the difference is, as opposed to Cosby, is that Cosby relied on it to his detriment, where he gave incriminating statements. And those incriminating statements, Areva, are what took Cosby down. Those were the strongest piece of evidence that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania had against Cosby. So not the same instance for Epstein, because it's not like Epstein went into a deposition and gave up the nitty gritty of everything he actually did. And you're talking about two different jurisdictions. A prosecutor can only tie you down for what jurisdiction they have over them. And that is for Casta, it was Montgomery County. You can't tie another jurisdiction to your deal.
Now, what about the fact that, and so you just said that what was so damning in this case in court, according to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, was that Cosby relied to his detriment. He went forward in that civil deposition. He gave testimony about buying quaaludes and giving quaaludes to women, and that was used in the trial by the subsequent prosecutor. So the prosecution, in opposing the appeal by Cosby, said to the court, hey, look, give us a chance to try this case again, and we won't even use that deposition testimony. We'll go forward with Constant as the victim and other evidence. And the court shut that down, said absolutely positively not. There will not be another prosecution on the basis of the allegations of Miss Constant. Why do you think the court came out in favor of not going forward with a trial that would not use that evidence that was so damning?
Areva, that's what I expected should have happened. Is that normally you got to think, for example, if it would have been a detective that would have got that statement from Cosby, what would have happened? That statement would have been suppressed and wouldn't have been brought into evidence. You could have still gone forward. But I think with this court, they said they wanted to send a message not just to Montgomery County, but I think to send a message to every district attorney's office in the country. Like, this is a chilling effect. The Court of Appeals wanted to make sure that you preserve the integrity of the prosecutor, who's the administrator of justice. They are supposed to administer justice. So they wanted everyone to take notice of this decision. Because let's be real, Areva, do you think if the Court of Appeals said, you know what, I'm just going to suppress this evidence, you can't use it at a future trial, would we still be talking about it to the magnitude that we've been talking about it since Wednesday? No. Sending this chilling decision to the world is what makes the world and the impact of this statement so strong. They wanted to emphasize the power of the prosecutor.
So I want to talk about the reaction. Obviously, you said you were surprised. I was shocked. I think every, body that's followed the case, everybody that's followed the Me Too movement, Cosby was the first celebrity that was prosecuted in this Me Too era, and it was thought to be this watershed moment that victims for the first time now were going to have their voices heard, that there was going to be more prosecution, even of powerful rich men like Cosby. There's been this incredible thing happening on social media. We were just showing the post from Bill Cosby himself, his fist raised, acting as if he was vindicated, his PR team coming out with all these statements, statements even saying that this was, some kind of historical great day for Black America. I wrote an op-ed for CNN pushing back on that, saying, Nicole Hannah Brown getting tenure at University of North Carolina was a great day for Black folks. Bill Cosby getting out of jail, not so much. But, a lot of folks disagreed with me. A lot of people on the Shade Room, a lot of people on Black Twitter were applauding, saying, look, another Black man has gotten out of prison. We even saw his former co-star Felicia Rashad tweet finally. And then there's this, brouhaha between Felicia and, the other actor on the Cosby Show, Janet Hubert saying, what are you thinking, Felicia? And we saw the president of Howard University, where Felicia Rashad is now the dean of the School of Fine Arts, push back, disavow her statement. The backlash towards Felicia Rashad was swift and pretty brutal. What do you make of what's happening in the blackosphere, I'll call it, black Twitter, black social media around this decision?
Well, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. I guess it just depends on who do we focus on as to why they're acting the way that they are. You got to think the criminal justice system has been a very sore spot for us in the Black community, and rightfully so, because we've seen so many injustices through the history, and we still see injustices here in 2021. So when you're looking at it from the perspective of, anytime someone is freed from jail and they're Black, then it's a win for the community. But I think that celebration is misplaced, especially in this case, because like I stated before, Bill Cosby wasn't released because he wasn't not guilty. He was released because of a technicality. The court at no point said, I don't believe this victim about what she alleges that happened to her, or any of the other victims that testified as no witnesses about what happened to them. It's a technicality. Also, in addition, I think, that celebration is also misplaced because in the end, we have to think about, we know that sexual violence takes place. We know sexual assaults actually take place. And it's something that is tended, especially in the Black community, we report it much less than any other culture. So I think we should be treading lightly when we're talking about how to celebrate this so-called win. It's not a win, it's a technicality. So I think it's just the praise is misplaced, and people should just take another look at what actually happened and why are you celebrating? Are you celebrating because you never believed it happened? That's different.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, and that's what I mentioned in my op-ed piece. Is look, Black women are disproportionately, the victims of sexual assault. We, as you said, don't report it. Cases often are not prosecuted. Often, Black women don't have the resources to hire private attorneys. So, Black women were also the victims of Cosby's, sexual predatory behavior. So nothing to celebrate. And if anything, we should be lifting up those voices of Black women and women, all women of any color who come forward and have told their stories. We got to move on. Other big legal stories happening. Britney Spears, whole movement on social media, free Britney Spears. I was on CNN the other night talking about it, and I got a flood of positive responses from, she's got this huge fan club, and anytime you say anything in support of Britney, they just give you a lot of love. And I was shocked at some of the things she revealed in that hearing. Being forced to wear an IUD, not being able to have children or get married or engage in the kind of everyday things that you would think a 39-year-old woman would be allowed to engage in. But help us understand what happened. There was a decision by the court on Wednesday that denied the removal, prevented her dad from being removed as conservator. And a lot of people are misconstruing that as believing that the court has rejected a recent petition by Britney Spears and her attorney to end the conservatorship. Help us understand that is not what the court did in this recent ruling.
So the thing is, Areva, now we know that this has been going on for years. For years, Britney has been trying to get freed from the bondages of her father and from all these regulations. But the problem is that the court has already determined that Britney is not capable of handling her own affairs, that because of mental issues and whatever other issues she may have that hasn't been disclosed to the public because they are HIPAA laws that entitle her to that privacy, that she's not able to manage her own affairs, and that it's to a detriment if she does. And that is why the court is erring in the side of caution and requiring and letting that the father still be a part of managing her affairs, especially since he's managed her affairs for all these years. And it's just not only him managing the affairs. Remember, there's also another corporation that is working and assisting and managing the affairs of Britney. But this is far from over. We're going to continue seeing this in the court because Britney is not giving up.
Yeah. The other thing that we should expect to see is she has begged her new attorney, her current attorney, to file yet another petition to dismiss and end this conservatorship. So don't be dismayed about this recent ruling. This actually had to
Hmm.
do with a filing dating back to November, and from the chilling, testimony she gave in court about how people are abusing her, taking advantage of her. I anticipate that we're going to see a very different result when that new petition is filed. Got to move on. Got to talk about our former president. He was not indicted, as many people had hoped and expected, but his corporation and his lifelong accountant Alan Weiselberg indicted in what has been described as a 15-year tax scheme by prosecutors in New York. A prosecutorial office that I'm sure you know very well, having been a prosecutor yourself in Manhattan. Help us understand how a corporation can be prosecuted. People generally think of prosecutions involving, individuals.
So what New York County is doing, and let's just be clear, because you have the option when it comes to prosecution, whether it's going to be the feds, whether it's going to be the attorney general, or whether it's going to be the county prosecutor. So here in this case against the Trump organization, it is actually the county prosecutor that has lodged an indictment against the chief financial officer of the Trump organization. So he is facing state charges for his violation. So what they're saying is that, look, this chief of the operation, that for years, dating up to 15 years, that for perks that he's gotten, whether it's gratuities, getting vacations, getting a paid car, getting his tuition paid, getting rent paid, $2 million worth of that, they did not pay taxes. So that's how they got him. They got him on the taxes. If you can't get anyone for the violence, you usually can get them for the taxes. So this is just a start, Areva. They charged him and indicted him because he is the head chief financial officer of the organization, who is responsible and has knowledge of the books and the money in the organization. So we haven't gotten to Trump yet. However, this is just the beginning. This is the head honcho for the organization that hopefully will lead more up to the top.
All right, we got a couple of questions I want to ask you, Bernarda, before I let you go. One, as it relates to Donald Trump, one of our viewers is asking, what do you think is going to be added in terms of charges that may allow the district attorney to ensnarl Trump in this whole scheme?
So, Reva, it's going to be very hard. I mean, what the district attorney's office is hoping is that this chief financial officer flips and cooperates against Trump. Because right now, we all know that Trump, he doesn't keep records. He's not into doing emails. He's not into sending text messages. So in order for any prosecution to go forward, you have to believe that you can prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. They do not have that winning piece at this time. So their next best bet is hoping that this chief financial officer will cooperate with the district attorney's office and be able to testify and offer credible evidence against Trump so they can be able to indict him. But I think without his cooperation, this investigation, this indictment is only go but so far. So they're trying to use the fear of him being in custody, serving a jail time at his age in order to impress upon him to testify against Trump so they can move forward against him.
All right, great. So I have a question going back to the Cosby matter. One of our viewers asked, can Cosby be taken back to court because of complaints of some of the other women? We know there were 50 or so women that came forward and testified, or at least made allegations against Bill Cosby. None of them have been proven in a court of law. He hasn't been convicted on any of those allegations, but we know, it's over 50 women. Can he be held accountable in a court of law for any of those allegations?
So the problem is, and the problem that the Montgomery County District Attorney ran into, is the statute of limitations. They looked into all these allegations, and the problem is that it was past the statute of limitations. So I believe it's 12 years you have from the time that the incident took place in order to file criminal charges against the accuser. And unfortunately, for the case of Bill Cosby, the only case that was within the statute of limitations was the one with the current victim of Miss Constance. In fact, they filed that indictment only days before the expiration of that statute of limitations. So all these women that you've heard of, none of them fall within the statute of limitations to be able to prosecute them. However, we don't know. Are other women going to come forward? It's going to be within the statute of limitations. Let's see.
And do you think, another viewer asked, do you think the case against Cosby should have been brought earlier, knowing that this subsequent prosecutor to Castor did move forward and did get a conviction on all three counts? Should Castor have prosecuted Cosby in 2005, after the allegations of Constant were brought to his attention?
So that's where the politics play a lot. I mean, I don't want to be second guessing another prosecutor, because times were different back then. We don't know what the jury pool is in Montgomery County, and they made an assessment of whether they can get a conviction. What I would say, Areva, if it would have been me, I would not have made a promise that I will not prosecute you, because we all know as time goes by, evidence can change. We can probably get someone to cooperate, just like in the Trump organization case. That can come by. You just never know when it can. So I wouldn't have bound my hands in that regard of saying that I would not have prosecuted. However, we don't know what the evidence, how strong it was in 2004. I believe that maybe what he should have done was presented a case to a grand jury or do a preliminary hearing and see, can you get an indictment as a result of that, and then just move forward with the evidence you have. You got to think that this time Cosby was tried twice. The first time they only used the testimony of that one victim. The second time they used what's called prior bad acts to show a motive, a common plan or scheme by putting other 5 other women that alleged that they were also assaulted by Bill Cosby. So times were different, but who knows? Only that Castor knows why he made the decision that he did.
Yeah, you raise a good point about these promises that prosecutors make not to prosecute. And I raised this point in my op-ed piece. Everyone that's celebrating this Castor's decision, need look no further than the prosecutors in Ahmaud Arbery's case. Those original prosecutors promised those white defendants that they were not going to be prosecuted criminally. And that case then was subsequently moved. New prosecutors come in and say, oh, hell no, there's sufficient evidence to prosecute all 3 for murder. And we, as the Black community, applauded that decision. So, and we've asked, the prosecutor in St. Louis County to go back and look at the evidence in Mike Brown's case to review that evidence. So there are lots of times when you don't want a prosecutor's decision not to prosecute, to be bond, to be word, to be binding. You want a new prosecutor that perhaps is more progressive, more aggressive, and more thoughtful to come in and look at the evidence and say, hey, yeah, I think I can get a prosecution here. So you got to be careful what you ask for, because there are so many cases, particularly involving police and involving Black victims, where prosecutors have decided not to prosecute, and we want that decision to be changed.
Absolutely.
When the prosecutor is elected. Also, want to go back briefly to the Trump matter. So you said not likely to be able to, prosecutors aren't going to be able to indict Trump unless Weisselberg flips, unless he gives them some information, he starts cooperating. How likely do you think that is? I mean, he has been pretty defiant up to this point. He's been talking to these prosecutors now for months. He knew this indictment was coming down. His legal team knew it. He's had an opportunity to share information about Donald Trump, but yet he hasn't. So do you think that he will?
So, Areva, the thing is that people don't take it seriously unless they finally see the silver bracelets on their hands. So finally, the district attorney's office was talking about it for a long time. They saw it happening, but did it actually happen? Now it has actually happened. Now there are formal charges against you. So maybe now he will see the light. We know previously how Michael Cohen was saying that Trump has no allegiance to anyone. He will sell out anyone. So hopefully this guy, this chief financial officer, takes heed to what this guy has said and be like, you know what? I need to save my own skin because I'm no longer a tenderoni. I can't afford to be in jail, not even for a day, spend the rest of my life in jail. And that may be much of an incentive for him to flip on Trump and give the state the information that they need to hold Trump accountable. But let's see.
What is it that you think Weisselberg could give the prosecutors, Bernarda, that would, lead to Donald Trump or even the Trump children?
So what he would have to give and what the prosecutor is missing right now is knowledge. How do we prove knowledge that Trump had the knowledge that this was going on? And that is what the prosecution is missing now in the charges against his chief financial officer, is that they can't have a strong enough link that Trump actually had knowledge that these perks were being taken, that the taxes were being paid on these perks that were being taken, that he was aware of these perks. That's what the prosecutor doesn't have right now, but they can get that if this chief financial officer can be like, you know what? I had a conversation with Trump. He was well aware. He's like, no, go ahead. I'll pay your rent. Go ahead. I'll give you a car. In fact, he said, go get another car. So that's what the prosecution needs now. And because you can't infer it, the inference is not strong enough to meet the burden of beyond a reasonable doubt. But like I said, I think it's still too soon. This is just the beginning. Sometimes you start with that small fish in order to get the big fish. So only time will tell of where we will be 1 year from now.
We're talking about this tax scheme, Bernarda, and the way that the Trump organization paid Alan Weisselberg so as to avoid taxation, so that the organization wouldn't have to pay taxes, and that Weisselberg wouldn't have to claim these perks as income and then pay income taxes on this tuition for his grandkids, this apartment rent, and the 2 Mercedes and other items that he got. But what about what Michael Cohen has been telling us now for months, which is that Trump was involved in paying Stormy Daniels, remember that name, blast from the past, paying for her to keep quiet about her story so that it wouldn't ruin his chances of being, president. And we know Michael Cohen was prosecuted for campaign violations, federal campaign violations, went to jail for that. And Trump was identified in that indictment for Michael Cohen as an unidentified, co-conspirator. So why isn't there charges now that he's out of office? Those, moving forward with some kind of charge related to that violation. And then there's allegations that Cohen has made that Trump plays around with the valuation of his property for insurance purposes, for bank loan purposes. It seems like there's a whole lot more, not just what's going on with, these payments to Alan Weisselberg.
Exactly. So we all have heard the rumors for years of different things that Trump has been doing. So you would think, well, Michael Cohen, he's spilling all of the tea. Why can't you go forward with what Michael Cohen is saying? Well, the problem is, Areva, is that when you're talking about evidence, you're talking also about credibility. Will a jury believe the testimony of Michael Cohen and accept it as evidence and believe that that is sufficient to prove Trump's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? So the prosecutors, they have looked at it many times. And the thing is that Cohen has been inconsistent. I mean, at one point, remember that he should have really testified in front of doing the hearings, that he decided not to testify during the hearings. And he's gone back and forth on his story. The back and forth right there is reasonable doubt. It's not enough to go forward and secure a conviction. And you want to prevent, if you are going to go with the case, that it is your strongest case because of double jeopardy. If you shoot and you lose, you can't do it again. There's not a do-over once you are acquitted. So you need to make sure that whatever testimony that you're getting, the evidence that you are getting, you are able to corroborate it, because you are going with one of the most powerful men in the country, especially in a former president. So you want to shoot to win.
Great point, Bernarda. We got to leave it there. Thank you so much. You've helped us unpack all of these really complex legal stories so much. I feel like, again, this was, law day, a law week. So many of these legal stories in the news. And thank you for your brilliance, your expertise in helping us understand. We're going to be focused on this Trump case. We're going to stay with what's happening with Britney Spears. And I'm sure we haven't heard the last of Bill Cosby. So with that, have a great holiday weekend, and I'll be talking to you soon, my friend. Thanks again for joining.
Thank you, Areva. Be safe, everyone.
All right. Okay, this Sunday is the 4th of July, Independence Day, and lots of folks will be celebrating with fireworks and barbecues. But what exactly are we celebrating? Here to help us understand is prominent race scholar and historian, Dr. Brenda Stevenson. She is a professor at UCLA and the author of What is Slavery? Welcome back to the show, Dr. Stevenson.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, this is one of the biggest holiday weekends of the year. 4th of July, fireworks, barbecues, lots of celebrations are going to be taking place this weekend. But help us understand, what is the significance of Independence Day?
Well, we usually or typically think about the 4th of July as the quote unquote birth of the nation. The birth of the United States of America is when the Declaration of Independence is certified, and it goes out to England, to the king, and to say, we're no longer part of the colonial empire of Britain. We now stand as an independent nation.
And I know you are one of the leading scholars on Juneteenth, and we just had this, national holiday. Juneteenth was made a national holiday. We just celebrated Juneteenth on June 19th. How significant is it that Independence Day this year, 2021, comes on the heels of the nation taking a significant step in reckoning with this past by acknowledging Juneteenth as a federal holiday?
Well, I think it's significant. I mean, I think it doesn't change the position of Black people in this country. And I think that's what we have to continue to remember, is that whether or not we're talking about the 4th of July or whether or not we're talking about Juneteenth, Black people in this country have not been treated as equals, whether or not we're looking at the law, whether or not we're looking at the economy or, social life or culture. And so, we're still working towards those goals that were established or that were at least voiced and penned in 1776. We're still working towards that goal for ourselves as a group of people who have never been fully brought into the nation.
And when you talk about the Declaration of Independence, obviously filled with this soaring rhetoric about all men being created equal, the Declaration of Independence, gave a voice to the values behind the American Revolution. You talked about, being free from Britain, but there was this glaring contradiction, and that glaring contradiction was slavery. So when we think about Independence Day and we celebrate the 4th of July, should we also be thinking about that glaring contradiction, and be remembering, or at least focused on, the fact that the colonists, the 13 colonies and the founding fathers who sought freedom from the British tyranny also were slave owners?
We should always think about that. I mean, the 4th of July is definitely a moment where we can stop and actually have deep and significant discourse about it, but it's something that we should always be thinking about. This promise that was made in the Declaration of Independence is something that has not been completely fulfilled. And it was not just Black people who were enslaved. It were indigenous people who were being, hunted and killed and their land taken from them. There were women who were not included. All this was going on at the time. So, it's a moment to reflect on what the nation was supposed to be and what we continue to work in the nation to, to make it to, but we haven't gotten there yet. And we continue to see, just as we continue to, understand and to feel and to exercise certain freedoms within this country, there are certain unfreedoms within the country too, certain inequalities that we need to continue to talk about, think about, reflect on, and demand that the government put in place.
Yeah, at the time of the Declaration of Independence, how many, enslaved people were there in the 13 colonies?
Well, I'm not certain of that exact number. I really can't tell you. It was close to 1 million, but I'm not sure exactly how many there were. But I can tell you that every colony had enslaved Black people. And most colonies had enslaved indigenous people at the time. And the number was just growing and growing and growing. And of course, by the time that we get to the Civil War, that we get to the end, to Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865, there were over 4 million people who were enslaved in the United States. And so even after the American Revolution, slavery ended in certain parts of the country, but the system continued to grow and the numbers of people enslaved continued to grow until we get to the point where the United States actually is the largest slave society in the Western Hemisphere, larger than Brazil, larger than what we found in the Caribbean, etc. And so while we move towards, looking at this country as a place of freedom and equality for all, we have to hold in our hands as well this huge contradiction. This huge conflict in value.
Yeah, And the founding fathers, we spend a lot of time in this country, revering our founding fathers, and people are complex, so people are not single dimensional, and obviously, founding fathers did something really good in terms of establishing the United States, but many of the founding fathers themselves were slave owners and had this kind of duplicitous relationship with chattel slavery. Thomas Jefferson, he wrote the Declaration of Independence, and an early version actually had a passage that condemned slavery. But that passage was later cut from the final wording. What are we to make of that? What does that tell us about the conflict, the internal conflict that was happening with the founding fathers?
Well, I think there was a lot of debate that was going on. In fact, we know that there was. I mean, South Carolina was not going to become part of the new nation. We know that if indeed, slavery did not exist, was not allowed to exist. Virginia was not either. I mean, Virginia had which is where Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and myself are from. Virginia had the largest numbers of enslaved people at the time. It was the first British colony in North America to have enslaved people. And slavery was not those people were not going to buy into, Patrick Henry, all those people, George Mason, who wrote the Bill of Rights, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington. Jefferson and Washington were some of the largest slaveholders in the largest slaveholding colony in this new nation, or state in this new nation. So slavery was not going to disappear. And while George Washington managed to manumit his enslaved people, not that of his wife, but his at the time of his death, Thomas Jefferson never did so. Indeed, he was in such debt when he died that many of his enslaved people had to be sold away from one another just to cover his debt. And so, intellectually, this was a question that people had and that they talked about. And it did have some impact in the Northeast, for example. The Northeast did move forward and, gradually free people who were there. The Northwest Territory did not allow slavery to develop. But when we're talking about, those Southerners who were founding fathers, this was not something that they were going to agree to. George Washington wouldn't even allow Black people to fight in the American Revolution for many, many years because he didn't want them to gain their freedom by doing so. And so there was a lot of controversy about it. But at the end of the day, these Southern founding fathers bought into the notion of Black chattel slavery as being something that was going to be part of the new nation.
So you're saying that the founding fathers, particularly those in the southern states that were making a living, obviously, on cotton and tobacco and other crops, envisioned that slavery would continue as a part of the new nation that was being formed, even as they talked about all men being created equally and having inalienable rights?
Well, they thought that perhaps it may die out in the future, but they were not going to end it. Okay. And the other thing too is that when they talked about all men being equal, they were not talking about Black people. They did not believe that Black people were the same kinds of people as white people were. They believed that we were inferior, that we would never be able to, sit at the table equally with white people. And so, what we now call, white supremacy, this was the idea of the day. It was something that people just took for granted, that Black people were inferior people. In fact, Jefferson writes about that in the Notes of the State of Virginia, his notion that Black people were a different kind of people. And he would leave it to, scholars and scientists in the future to continue to ask this question, to continue to investigate this question. So, here we have on the one hand, the founding father who writes this document, the Declaration of Independence, and on the other hand, writes in this description of the United States that Black people, he thinks, are an inferior species of people, and that people should take this on. So on the one hand, you have the basis for a great nation, and on the other hand, you have the basis for white supremacist ideology, both of which we are still trying to come to terms with today, and resolving this this disconnect.
Yeah, and as I sit here, Dr. Stevenson, I think about the many people who would say, those were the founding fathers. clearly we've evolved, right? And people are allowed to evolve, to grow, to change, to come into a new way of thinking. And folks would say we should not be continuing to talk about the founding fathers and their antiquated notions about black people being inherently inferior to whites. That we should recognize that people are more advanced in their thinking. But how do you respond to that, and how do we uh, continue to have this conversation in a way that moves us forward, but while recognizing that embedded in the very founding of this country, is this contradiction, is this notion that blacks are inferior?
Well, I think I think you've said it best. People are complex. The founding fathers were complex people. On the one hand, Thomas Jefferson was a brilliant, intellectual and also politician or statesman, as people call them. But on the other hand, he was a common slaveholder with the same kinds of ideas and actions that any slaveholder had at the time. And because these are examples of the quote unquote best of the nation, they continue to their lives, what they did to Black people, the way in which they thought about Black people, indigenous people, women, still holds weight, in terms of the intellectual stream, or I shouldn't say intellectual, I would say the cultural stream of the nation. What I think is really important for people to understand who are so upset about the fact that we discuss the problems with, founding fathers' ideology and principles and behaviors, is that they are no different. This nation is really not exceptional in that way. You have to understand that slavery was an institution that began in the ancient world, and it still exists today. It is a problem of mankind, of humankind, and we have got to get, and the bleed out from that, the problems from that in terms of the way in which people see one another is still something that we deal with today. People continue to, because of the quote unquote whitewashing of history, people continue to not understand what Black people, indigenous people, Latinx people, Asian people, etc., have experienced in this country. And not just the bad stuff, but the contributions that we have all made to this country. And because people can't see that Black people have contributed to the greatness of this nation, Black people fought in the American Revolution, okay, for the forming of the nation. We have fought in every war to defend the nation. And people seem not to understand that. When you talk about tobacco, cotton, all these crops that Black people grew, these were the foundations of the economy, of the national economy, of this country. And so it's not just, we have to understand that the founding fathers did something spectacular, and their documents are still held up as being these great examples of ideal political structure and behaviors. But this was an ideal, this was a utopian ideal that we have not been able to realize. And understanding the gap between the ideal and the reality is very, very important. It is what makes a nation great or not.
Well, you're saying even the idea that the founding fathers wrote about and talked about didn't envision or didn't encompass Black people. They did not think of Black people as being human. So when they talked about men being equal, you said they weren't thinking that Black men were equal even at that time.
No. They were not. And it doesn't get to that specific, all men are equal, except for Black people, except for indigenous people, except for, these other kinds of people. So, because it does not particularize, and that's what makes it such a brilliant and beautiful document, because it can evolve. Right. Over time, and as our notion of what is humanity, that people are equal develops, then we can apply, this ideal vision of a world, of a nation, to be inclusive of everyone.
Dr. Stevenson, the Star-Spangled Banner, we've been talking about that this week in the news because of two-time Olympian Gwen Berry. Gwen, a hammer thrower, has been criticized because she turned away when she was receiving her third place medal in the Olympic trials, and she, has been firm about the fact that she's an activist, she's an athlete, but that she will not salute the flag, and she says the Star Spangled Banner is racist. Help us understand, what the Star Spangled Banner, give us perspective on that, at least in the way that Gwen Berry is seeing it.
Well, I think I don't want to speak for her specifically, but I do think that, people have criticized some of the lyrics as you get, into the deeper, the longer version of the Star Spangled Banner, the lyrics, and how, the lyrics indeed indicate some racism there. But one of the things I think that people have to understand is that these founding documents allow for people to express themselves politically. All right. And that is the way in which people, Black people, the way in which we have chosen to express ourselves politically is covered by these documents, and, every time the Star Spangled Banner is played, every time, you're supposed to salute the flag, people look around to see, well, what are Black people doing? What are Black, to criticize, what we're doing. But we have a right to recognize our place in the history of this nation, and whether or not the nation has indeed respected our citizenship, has respected the kinds of contributions that we have made, and have respected our pain that comes from being discriminated against within this country. And so, it's a way of improving the nation. People often say you're damning our nation, you are undermining our nation. It is a way, if you cannot, pinpoint the problems in an institution, you cannot fix that institution. So Black people have to be, we have to be applauded for always standing up and saying, that's not right.
Yeah.
Okay? That's not right. All right. Now, this may be right, but that's not right.
Yeah.
And we have put our bodies and our careers, our lives, our well-being on the line every time, every generation, to help this nation to become what it was supposed to be and what it can be.
Yeah. One final question from one of our viewers. We're taking questions this morning, Professor Stevenson, is from Howard. And he says, do you feel that President Abraham Lincoln changed the perspectives of people as it relates to African Americans?
Well, Abraham Lincoln, unfortunately, also did not believe that Black people were equal to white people. Okay, and we find this in some of his political speeches. And so it was, it was the 19th century. This is what people, except for Black people, believed, that Black people were not equal to white people, that we could not accomplish what white people could accomplish, that we could. And he also believed that we would never be accepted as equals in this country. So if he had lived, he actually wanted to colonize us outside of the country, either in Liberia or, Sierra Leone or the Caribbean or Latin America. But he believed that the racism, the divide, the racial divide in the country was so deep that Black people would never be afforded equality within the nation and be able to live and to thrive. And so I think that, signing onto the Emancipation Proclamation, which was a fraught process, a process that, dealt with inclusion of Black people, or freedom of Black people, but also was was needed in terms of military tactics as well. Once that happened, and there were all these Black abolitionists like Frederick Douglass and many other people coming to him and saying, make this into a war of liberation, make this into a war of liberation. He finally agreed to do so. And so that had a tremendous impact. I mean, we're free today as a result of it. Free, but nonetheless free, as a result of it. So just like, Washington and George Mason and Thomas Jefferson, as you say, these are complex people. And when it comes to race, particularly complex and usually disappointing. But we have to take the good along with that.
With the bad. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Well, we've got to leave it there, Dr. Stevenson. Thank you so much for your insights. Thank you for giving us a an accurate and a historical way to think about Independence Day as we're out there, drinking beer and eating barbecue, that we don't forget, what Independence Day really stands for, and particularly its meaning for African Americans. So again, thank you so much and have a wonderful weekend yourself.
Thank you as well. And I just want to remind people that we did help to form this country and we have supported this country. So we have a right to celebrate Independence Day, even if it has not been applied equally to us.
Fantastic. Thank you for those final words, Dr. Stevenson.
Thank you.
All right, we've been talking about Independence Day and all the big news of the week, and we couldn't talk about the news without talking about what's happening in the sports world, the world of sports, from NBA, from college athletes to Olympic athletes. And I'm delighted to have back on the show with me one of my good friends. His name is Otis Birdsong. He is a former NBA All-Star, I should say, and he's a former president of the NBA Retired Players Association. Good morning, Otis, and thank you for joining us. I know you're in Florida doing what you do, helping kids in a training camp, so I'm glad you could steal away for 10 minutes just to help us understand all this big news as it relates to sports. First, I want to start with this decision that college athletes can finally get paid for their name, image, and likeness. You played college sports, and before you went to the NBA. How big is this?
Huge. These colleges make so much money on these athletes, so this is just a huge announcement. I'm happy that it finally has come to pass. My concern is, how are you going to pay the athletes, though? And I think about the Black colleges who don't have the resources that these other colleges do. What about those? What about the women? Are you going to pay the women who participate in women's sports? So I don't know how they're going to be able to pay these athletes. I'm happy that they've agreed to do that, but I don't know how they're going to make it work.
But what about Otis? I'm thinking about the big brands like Nike and Puma. This gives these athletes now an opportunity to actually do endorsement deals that have been traditionally reserved just for players like yourself that get into the professional leagues. So do you see opportunities there for some kids who may be at a poor Black college being able to get a deal with Nike?
No, because I don't think that's going to be a part of the agreement. I don't think they're going to allow those kids to go out and brand themselves with those companies like Nike. Because keep in mind now, those college coaches have contracts with the brands like Nike and the Adidases and Reeboks. So they're not going to allow the kids to do their own deal. Mm-hmm. When a college has a contract with, say, Nike, that means the players are at their school, they have to wear Nike shoes.
Okay. So we know, Otis, for years that the colleges have resisted giving these kids the opportunity to profit from their own name, image, and likeness. And the argument that they've always made is that, look, we're giving you free college tuition. We're giving you free room and board. Help us understand why that argument was flawed from the beginning.
Well, it's flawed from the beginning because, first of all, nowadays, when I played, it was almost like a guaranteed contract. When you signed to go to a university, you were guaranteed 4 years of participation in that sport. Nowadays, if they don't like the way you play, they can get rid of you. After 1 year, they say, well, you didn't work out. We're going to bring someone else in. So it's flawed for that particular point. But also, they make so much money. If you compare with what they provide as far as an education for the kids and the monies they bring in through athletics, it's like 100,000 to 1 in regards to what a college education costs and the monies these universities make. So that doesn't hold water. And I'm just glad now that they finally allow these kids to make some money.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that too. Yeah, you look at all these coaches, multi-million-dollar contracts for the coaches. College presidents at these big college, universities make multi-million dollars in compensation. Many of them live in mansions, live lavish lifestyles like they're CEOs of big corporations. So, and these kids, many of them are Black, particularly when you talk about football and basketball. Many of them from poor communities can barely survive in school, can't buy books, can't buy school supplies, and yet they're, making billions of dollars for these big institutions. So I say it's one of the biggest things ever. It's almost like, I hate to use the word slave, but sometimes I felt like those kids were indentured servants or slaves to these universities, and now they're free. So go out there and make some money, kids. That's what I say.
Still have a lot of work to do, though, Areva. Still have a lot of work because is it going to entail paying every sport, the participants in every sport, as well as the women? So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You see Reggie Bush now, Otis is saying, give me back my Heisman Trophy. And, Reggie got into trouble because he was accepting money, as a college student when he shouldn't be. Do you think that trophy should be given back to Reggie?
No doubt. And I'm going to just be honest with you. I'm going to be straight with you. I think a lot of these colleges are still paying players under the table. It's hard to trace cash. He took monies like a lot of these guys do. And he just happened to, he didn't get caught. Someone turned him in. I actually got mad at him and turned him in. So that has nothing to do with what he accomplished on the football field. I'm one of those guys who think that Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. Yes, he bet on baseball and whatever he did, but his accomplishments on the field, he should be in the Hall of Fame. We are such a hypocritical nation. I mean, the guy makes a mistake or two like that. That had nothing to do with what he accomplished in baseball. Betting on baseball had nothing to do with what he achieved on the field. He should be in the Hall of Fame. He didn't take drugs to achieve what he achieved.
Okay, Otis, we're talking about rules and breaking rules. That brings me to my next story, which is Olympic, star, thought was going to the Olympics to be one of the biggest stars, one of the biggest track and field stars. Sha'Carri Richardson just, positive tests for marijuana. Now prospects of running in that 100 are slim to none, although she may get to play on run for the relay team, in the Summer Olympics. She came on TV this morning, apologized, said she had just learned that her biological mother died. She actually learned it from a reporter doing an interview that triggered, that was a triggering event for her, caused her to use marijuana. She apologized to her family, to her fans. Do you think Sha'Carri should be running that 100 in the Summer Olympics?
First of all, my heart goes out to her. Condolences on the loss of her mother. I know that was tough. And marijuana is legal in Oregon, but unfortunately, the rules for the Olympics is even stricter than they are for professional sports. So they are a no-nonsense organization. Even though my heart goes out to her, she broke the rules. You can't use enhancing drugs, especially in the Olympics. And unfortunately, she's not going to be able to participate.
Yeah, I have a question. We're taking some questions this morning. Howard is asking Otis, do you think there should be a ceiling on what college athletes should make?
Well, that's my concern. I don't know how they're going to pay these guys. Does the 12th man who never gets on the floor or on the football field receive the same amount of monies that the star players do? So, it's good in one sense that they're going to pay them, but I'm telling you, it's going to be tough sorting this out as to how they're going to pay these athletes.
Yeah, no, we're going to have to, pay close attention to that and watch that. I want to keep moving, though, talking about these Olympic Games. Gwen Berry, also in the news this week, two-time Olympian hammer thrower, sparked a controversy when she turned away from the flag and put a T-shirt over her head which said activist athlete during the national anthem on the podium at the Olympic trials. Obviously, it brought to mind the 1968 John Carlos and Tommy Smith, that iconic photo of them, raising a fist. We know they were sent home from Mexico City after raising, that Black Power fist on the podium. What do you think about this controversy involving Gwen Berry?
Well, that's a tough one. But I do think people need to have the opportunity to express themselves, especially when they disagree with certain things that are going on in society. And it's not like she's opposed to the nation. I mean, it's the national anthem. The same people who make so much fuss about the national anthem agree with the stuff that our past president did the last 4 years, the hatred and the way he talked to people and about people. The same people who profess to love the national anthem so much are the same people who are on board with slavery. They profess to love this country and the national anthem, and they go to church and profess to be holy, but yet they want to own slaves. So it's such a hypocritical nation, and people are so hypocritical. And she's expressing herself. You have the right to burn the flag, if you want to, talking about the national anthem. You can burn the flag in this country. That's what we have here. So to say, the hatred and the stuff that she's receiving, it's amazing. But she was just expressing herself, and in this country, we are allowed to do that.
Yeah, Caitlyn Jenner, former Olympian, now running for governor in the state of California, or possibly running for governor, criticized Gwen Berry, calling her conduct disgusting. Caitlyn said that political statements don't belong on the podium at the Olympics. Do you think, and you said it, the Olympics are very strict, have lots of rules, even stricter rules than professional sports. But what do you think about the podium per se? Obviously you have already said that you believe Gwen has a right to protest. Do you think though that there are limits to that protest, and the podium at the Olympics should be one of those places where those limits should be imposed?
I don't think so. And what John Carlos and Tommy Smith and those guys did, it was huge. In fact, it was so impactful that you're talking about it today. And people still talk about it today around the world because it made such an impact. And so what better place than the Olympics, which includes people from all nations, all countries, all walks of life. What better place to display a protest than at the Olympics, when it includes all of the nations around the world?
Got to leave it there. Otis, always good to see you. Thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing in Miami with those kids. Thank you, for your insights today. Really appreciate having a chance to sit down with you. Good luck to you in Florida, and have a great holiday weekend.
Thank you. You too, Areva.
All right, I want to say thanks to all of my guests this morning, and thanks for all the questions. We got to answer a couple of them, and those that we didn't get to today, I'll go back over the weekend and I'll get you some responses to those questions. Just want to tell everyone, as you celebrate Independence Day, as Dr. Stevenson told us, don't just reflect on what the founding fathers did. Think about the Black people and the indigenous people in this country who have made such contributions, whose contributions are often forgotten about, marginalized, and actually dismissed. We wouldn't be here. This rich nation that we call the United States would not be here but for the work of those indigenous people and the enslaved people who were enslaved in this country as at the beginning of the United States, as they were forming this nation, as the 13 colonies were coming together. There were enslaved people even then. And by 1865, we know there were 4 million Black people enslaved in this country. And it's because of those crops, tobacco and cotton and those other agricultural crops in the South, that we have the economy that we have in this country today. So eat your barbecue, drink your beer, but think about the work and sacrifices of those people. Just some words to live by before I get out. You've heard me quote Biggie often, and I love his quote, lyrics from his song that says, if you don't know, now you know. Here are some fun facts about Independence Day that you can use at your weekend barbecue to show your friends and family that now you know. First fact, the Statue of Liberty was gifted to the United States in 1866 by France. A lot of people didn't know that. Also, the copper substance on the Statue of Liberty is what gives it its iconic green hue. Also, the bald eagle, the U.S.'s national bird. But Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers, once jokingly said that the turkey should be the nation's symbol. Also, the national mammal. You know what the national mammal is? It's the American black bear. That Star-Spangled Banner we were talking about was written by Francis Scott Key during the War of 1812. We know African Americans fought in that war, and there are some lyrics in that Star-Spangled Banner that many people take exception to, lyrics that are incredibly offensive to a lot of Black folks, including Gwen Berry. In the early 1900s, several prominent Americans had planned a new memorial overlooking the New York harbor near the Statue of Liberty. This was going to commemorate Native Americans and the contributions to this country. Guess what? It never happened. And in 1970, remember, if you were alive, you remember this famous, iconic ad campaign by Chevrolet that tried to sum up America's favorite things. Now, not everybody will agree, but this ad was incredibly popular in the 1970s. And the jingle said, I love baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet. Okay, may not be your favorite things, but it was a big ad for Chevrolet in the 1970s. I'm out, y'all. Be safe out there. Have a wonderful 4th of July weekend. And remember, we are all in this together.